We are celebrating Bishop Hill's 175th anniversary. Can you say semi-demi-septicentennial? Demi-semi-sepcentennial. Yeah, that's 175th anniversary. It's amazing to think 175 years ago, nearly 1,000 Swedes left everything they knew, sold everything they owned, left family and friends, crossed the Atlantic into the wilderness and arrived here. And not a founder, but one of the early teachers at the Bishop Hill School was the sister of the gentleman you're about to meet. Let's welcome Carl Sandburg.
Thank you, my friend, and a fine introduction worth waiting for. Well, as I said before, I know this building. I had been here a few times. Just when I came to visit my sister, she toured me around, and of course, being a historian, I was fascinated by this place. And I used to take the train from Galesburg to Galva, and then the short hop up here, as I said. And I'd be walking down the road and smoking a cigar, or just thinking possibly about a next poem or two, who knows. And I'd meet these people that she had introduced me 2 years ago. And are there any of them still here? Any of the Stonebergs? No? Oh. How about the Arnquists? Any Arnquists, or relatives or friends thereof? Well, she told me to tell you hello, but the Petersons, Petersons must be here. Where did they go? Well, it's a pleasure to be back in Bishop Hill. It truly is. And being born in Galesburg, I identify greatly with the people who are here, being one myself. You see, my dad's name was August, and he was according to the tenor of the times, he was illiterate. He knew Swedish perfectly well and could read it perfectly well. He just wasn't so good at English yet. We arrived in the same wave of immigrants that many of your people did. We came to Bishop Hill because there was opportunity. My dad got a job. He got a job as a blacksmith. He was a very, very technically oriented man. And he used those skills to work in the CBMQ shop, the railroad. And that railroad, I'll tell you what, he planted a seed in me that never left. Because I would lay at night and I would listen to those trains leaving, because our house was not far from the tracks. I hear it's still there. And he would tell me about those trains, and he'd tell me about where they were going, and he'd give me ideas of places beyond where I had been. The steel rails wake me from the margins of my sight, rumbling out there right beyond my window. Spirit me northward through the middle of the night, Union Station bound, Chicago. City's got an energy, the pull of shifting gears, reaching down the tracks to touch my longing. Loosen the ties that bind a rambler's leaving here, steel rail ribbon carrying me away. Past the fields of home I know, past the forest and the river, magnetize my ebb and flow, stated simply need to go. And then the little house over by the railroad tracks, sometimes I couldn't tell if we were in Sweden or if we truly were American. The languages were mixed all the time, and I grew up learning a little bit of Swedish. When I came into this world, though, there was some screaming that went on in that house, and it wasn't in English. "Dat är en pojke! It's a boy!" That's what my dad said. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I finally figured it out. I finally figured it out that I was both. And that's what I wanted to stay. I kept a little bit of this town in my pocket wherever I'd go, and I could pull it out. I could pull it out when I needed it. I mean, this was a Swedish enclave. This one too, but Galesburg was as well. About a third of those people came from Swedish backgrounds. And I knew that my destiny was not to be played out on the streets and the alleys of Galesburg. It's a beautiful little town. It still is, but it was too quiet for this restless soul. And those railroads, they were calling me, and well, I got bit by the traveling bug real early. You see, when I was 14, a couple of buddies of mine and I borrowed a wagon from a friend's dad, one of these guys' dads, and we bought 2 horses. Now, right before that, I'd gone into a pawn shop and I bought my first guitar. $2. $2. Well, I planned to take it with me and do a little singing because I've been playing guitar all my life and banjo too, and I would never want to give that up. It's too joyful. And so me and those buddies, we hitched 2 horses to that wagon. Now, it didn't come with horses. You know, it's like buying a car without an engine, I'd say. Yeah, we had to find them. And so we found 2 horses. A $2 horse. Well, then we stepped it up. We got a $3 horse. And we hitched those 2 nags to that wagon, and me and my buddies jumped in, and we headed for the adventure of a lifetime. 14 years old, remember? 14 years old. My daddy was always filling me full of tales about places where these trains went, and I wanted to see one of them. And one of them was a long way from here. We went all the way. I mean, all the way to Peoria. 14, you know. Driving 2 old broke nags, I mean, come on. So we went to the Illinois River and we camped on the banks of that beautiful river. And we were splashing in the water and fishing and playing, and I was picking on that guitar, and we were having a great time. But the time, you know, good times always end, and it came to go home. And we giddy up that team of horses, and that $3 horse crapped out right in front of us, fell dead on the spot right into the sand. So we buried him, had a short little ceremony, and bought another $3 horse. Evidently, there were many of them in Peoria because we made our way back. And we got back to Peoria. But I'll tell you what, that prairie taught me so many things. It taught me so many vital things. The value of friendship, the value of money, the value of being who you got to be, and the value of warmth. Me and my brother Martin used to stand there in the kitchen. We had an old coal stove, and it was fed by coke. And we would stand around that old stove, and we had blankets like wings and stuff. And we'd stand there, and we'd get nice and warm, and then we'd run upstairs and jump into bed. Didn't go right to sleep, though. We either had a candle or a lantern, and we would both lay there just getting lost in books. You guys ever get lost in books? Oh, boy. There's an adventure. Always an adventure. Books will take you places that you could never get to any other way. And we did. We did. Well, like I said, that traveling bug had bit me. And a short time after that, I decided to make a little trip away. Tired of my head banging on the bars of what has been. Smoke of countless engines points direction. Lurching, clanging, freedom remedy the state I'm in. Steel rail ribbon carry me away. Past the fields of home I know, past the forest and the river. Magnetize my ebb and flow, stated simply need to go. And go I did. Jumped a freight train in Galesburg and headed west to the wheat fields of Kansas. Now, if you were going on an unknown destination journey and an unknown length of time, what would you take with you? Anybody? Well, that's 2 good things, but I figured I'd find that along the way because I became an official hobo. And I learned a lot of things. And what do you think I took with me? I took a hat, a pocket mirror.
Paper and pencil?
Paper and pencil.
Oh.
No. Are you kidding me? I was traveling light. I took a watch. I took a pipe and a little tobacco. I took a pocket comb. I took 2 handkerchiefs, and I took 1 change of underwear. And I jumped on that freight, and I headed west. And I did not have a clue what I would find. But what I found was myself. And I found myself by doing stuff that I'd never done before, like laying railroad ties, working in kitchens, filching food when I had to. You know, we found out how to tell where there was food and lodging, maybe even some money doing work available, because we'd pull up to a railhead, and the hobos before had scratched on a white picket fence a chicken leg or a dollar sign or something like that. That meant we could go to that house and knock on the door, and they might help us out. Of course, we weren't bums. We'd work for it. That's the difference between a hobo and a bum. Hobo's a working man. He's just moving around a lot, and that's what I was doing. And I stretched it out, but at the time I started listening in those hobo jungles. I started listening to those songs that people were singing. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of songs I'd never heard. And I started writing them down with that pen and pencil that you mentioned. Because I knew one of these days I'd put together a compilation of those songs and try to save them, pass them down, keep them out of the trash bin of history. So I started doing that early on, but other things were calling. One of them was that city that my dad gave me a rail pass to when I was 15, after I got back, Chicago. Chicago was calling. I wouldn't get there quite yet, but it was calling. I had to do a couple of things since then. I went back to Galesburg. I got involved in the Spanish-American War for a very short time. As Abraham Lincoln said, I lost a lot of blood from the mosquitoes. I came back to Galesburg, and I got involved for the first time in an actual situation where I began to learn something other than what I was able to pick up on my own. And that was Lombard College. I enrolled in Lombard College. You might know it as Knox College to this day. Well, I enrolled there, and when I enrolled there, I began to bump up against people who had a lot more knowledge about things of literature than I did, and I started to pay attention, and I started to write down some of the things I was thinking in a little more serious manner. And the first time I wrote something down and tried to publish it, it was from a book that I put together, handwritten, called In Reckless Ecstasy. God, I still love that title. I just got a chill. The cogs, this is called From In Reckless Ecstasy. The cogs and the wheels, they hum and whirl, paying their bond to the human brain. They card the wool, they hammer the steel. They utter no cry of joy or pain. You remember what was happening? Things were changing. Industrial revolution was going to all different kinds of places, and there was machinery that no one had ever seen just popping up everywhere. This is also from an early work. This is called The Working Men. In the dusk of the dawn they go, 100,000 feet sloughing the sidewalks, setting a dull rumbling hum up the streets of the city. Can't you hear it? I can hear it. Well, things were moving along still, and now Chicago was calling me in a big way. So I jumped on a train, and I went north to that city by the lake. The first time I'd seen it, when that pass given to me by my dad, I was amazed. I just walked around all day looking up at those amazing tall skyscrapers and buildings, and I began to fall in love with the excitement of that city. And when I got there, I would walk around at night, even in the rain. It didn't mean a damn thing to me if it was raining. It just added to the feeling. And I'd lean up against the L tracks, the posts that hold up the elevated railroad, and I would just sit there while they rumbled and they hummed as those L trains went over. And I began to absorb the pulse of that city. It was the fresh breath of life and the red stare of death. It was a combination of the best of both of that. And it began to create in me a desire to become even deeper involved in my poetry. Here's one you might know. Hog butcher for the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads and the nation's freight handler, stormy, husky, brawling, city of the big shoulders. They tell me you are wicked, and I believe them. For I have seen your painted women under the gas lights luring the farm boys. They tell me you are crooked, and I answer, yes, it is true. I have seen the gunman kill and kill and kill and go free to kill again. And they tell me you are brutal, and my reply is, on the faces of women and children, I have seen the marks of want and hunger. And having answered so, I turn once more to those who sneer at this, my city, and I give them back the sneer, and I say to them, come and show me another city with lifted heads, singing, so proud to be alive, and coarse and strong and cunning, flinging magnetic curses amid the toil of piling job on job. Here was a tall, bold slugger sent vivid against the little soft cities, fierce as a dog, with tongue lapping for action, cunning as a savage, pitted against the wilderness, bareheaded, shoveling, wrecking, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding, under the smoke, dust all over his mouth, laughing with white teeth, under the terrible burden of destiny, laughing as a young man laughs, laughing as an ignorant fighter laughs who has never lost a battle, bragging and laughing that under his wrists is the pulse, and under his ribs the heart of the city. Laughing the stormy, husky, brawling laughter of youth, half naked, sweating, proud to be hog butcher, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and freight handler to the world. That was my town. Thank you. Thank you. You see, I need to have these songs down here because of all the words seem to slip away after so many years being dead. Speaking of dead, I went down. That's the wrong key. Let's put it up here. I went down to St. James Infirmary. Saw my baby there. She was laid out on the table, so white, so cold, so fair. It was originally called the Gambler's Blues, and then it was called St. Joseph's Hospital, which is impossible to sing. Well, I went up to see the doctor. She's very low, he said. Went back in to see my woman. Good God, she was lying dead. Let her go, God bless her. Wherever she may be, will there never be another one like her. Not another one for me. Well, I may be killed by the ocean, maybe killed by a cannonball. Well, let me tell you now, buddy, a woman was the cause of it all. Take 17 girls to the graveyard, 17 girls sing a song. Take 17 girls to the graveyard, only 16 come back for long. When I die, just lay me under in a box back coat and hat. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain. Tell the Lord I'll stand pat. So let her go, God bless her. Wherever she may be, will there never be another one like her. Not another one for me. Thank you. Oh boy, I was learning to love that place. You can look at it any way you wish, but Chicago has never been dull. And you always learn something when you go there. At least I always did. Well, I began to work in at newspapers, small newspapers, and I started writing. For a living, and all of that time I was thinking about poetry. I mean, I became pretty quickly known as the poet of the newsroom and the poet of the magazine article and things like that. And one day, I was researching an article, and I was in an office. I'm not even sure who it was anymore. It's been so long. And I was waiting there for the interview and the person to be ready to see me, and all of a sudden came out of the back room a woman. Now, let me ask you gentlemen, have any of you gentlemen ever seen a woman that you just stopped dead in your tracks? Don't lie to me, I know you have. That is exactly what happened that day, because that's the first time I saw Lily and Paula Steichen. And I kind of resolved right there on the first meeting that we were going to be together. Now, making that happen was a little different, But it did happen. But I tell you what, she was so poised and yet approachable at the same time that I felt a little bit like that frog who hadn't yet been kissed by the beautiful princess. Oh, frog went a-courting, he did right, Frog went a-courting, he did right, Frog went a-courting, he did right, flowers and candy by his side, Well, he rode right to Miss Mousie's door, Rode right to Miss Mousie's door, Rode right to Miss Mousie's door, where he'd never been before, Well, he took Miss Mousie on his knee, Took Miss Mousie on his knee, Took Miss Mousie on his knee, said, pretty woman, will you marry me, Without my Uncle Rat's consent, Without my Uncle Rat's consent, Without my Uncle Rat's consent, I wouldn't marry the president. Probably a good idea. Well, where shall the wedding be? Where shall the wedding be? Where shall the wedding be? Way down yonder in a hollow tree. Thank you. Anyone else like the banjo? Oh, yeah. I love the banjo. Used to be getting mugged if you got caught playing a banjo. Not so much more, I take it. Well, that woman, I tell you, I was crazy over her. I started writing love poems to her. You know how it is when you want to impress a gal. You'll do anything you need to do to impress her. And that's what I was trying to do. And she knew I was a poet. I told her about that kind of thing. And I started to write one of those poems down. And let's give you an idea, just an idea of how deeply she was affecting me, that Miss Lillian Paula Steichen. And I always called her Paula, by the way. This is one called She Held Herself a Deep Pool for Him. She held herself a deep pool for him, and the shadows crying for him. He gathered himself in many dark waters, and the shadows crying for her. They took each other in shadow meetings. They held each other in shadow songs. She coiled herself around him with a ribbon of glass and a rope of gold. The coils of her cunning held him with rings of golden glass, with a moon of melting gold, with a mist of sunset ribbons. I was in love. Oh, my. Oh, my. Well, she has been a blessing to me. There is no doubt I would not have been able to do many of the things I've done without her assistance and loving assistance. No complaints. She just wanted to help out, and she was a true helpmate in so many ways. We got married. There was no money. There were no rings. She thought they were relics of barbarism. That's the kind of woman I married. Now, you can expect what the rest of our time might have been like. She raised Nubian goats. Prize-winning Nubian goats. Well, I'll tell you, I started to work for a number of, as I said, newspapers and magazines. And as happens many times when people get married, they have children. And we had 3. I would have favored a boy at first, but when those 3 beautiful girls of mine came along, Margaret, Helga, and Janet, I was completely in love and am to this day. What can I say? Well, I was starting to try to field my poetry, put it out to the public, and that's a difficult thing to do, as any artist knows. And so I started to go into places that I knew published poetry in Chicago. There were 2 or 3. And one of them was a magazine, and they published a magazine called Poetry, a magazine of verse. Simple. I went in there with a folder full of my Chicago poems, similar to the one I read. And as I sat down in there, I waited and waited for a minute, and they finally called me in, and I offered them these things, and they said, well, Mr. Sandberg, your poems are being published at this minute. And I about fell over. I said, what? And they said, well, yes, your wife, Mrs. Sandberg, brought those in a couple of months ago and gave them all to us, and we love them, and we're publishing them. And as you can imagine, I was speechless. That's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of helpmate she was. She helped me out before I ever knew it. And they did well. The poems did well. You know, they caught their attention, and I was working for a magazine called Daybook. And I was sitting there waiting for an interview in the little waiting room, and I took out my pen and pencil, and I wrote down a little 22-word poem. And God knows why it's one that people remember the most. So I've been told. It's called Fog. See? The fog comes in on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches, and then moves on. It's just a simple little literary device, personification. And, well, let me read it again. The fog comes in on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches, and then moves on. I did it better the second time, I think. I really did, I think. Wait a minute, hold on here. Oh, well, things were moving along, and I did manage to get those poems published, and they did begin to sell, and the name started to spread, and poetry just kept rolling out. And in my poetry, as you might know, I use a lot of slang. And the best definition of slang I have ever heard came from a very inexperienced, very energetic newspaper woman from Moline, Illinois. She wanted to interview me after a performance I did and got done playing guitar, and she walked up and she said, Mr. Sandberg, is slang kind of language that takes off its coat, rolls up its sleeves, spits on its hands, and gets to work? And I said, yes. And if I'd gotten her name, I would have sent her a love poem and a bouquet of flowers, but I never did. But I absolutely love that. And you know how those things, when they hit you, you never forget them? Well, I'll tell you. Kept working, kept trying to get better, and kept trying to explore and open up the world, because that's how artists work. If they're not open to the world around them, they'll never create anything other than what's in their own bedroom or backyard. You have to experience things. Well, I managed to make friends with a number of musicians along the way. And one of my absolute favorites was the gentleman that taught me how to play this. Andres Segovia. We became fairly good friends. He was the master of the classical guitar at his time. And we used to discuss the instrument, because I'm a guitarist from way back, and obviously he is as well. And he told me that it was just a matter of a little more focused practice and concentration. And I kept thinking if I'd had a long prison sentence, I might have gotten to be a good guitar player. But what I took from him, I've tried to use. Well, we moved to the dunes. A change was at hand. Chicago was, I'd done all I could there, and I wanted my girls to have a little quieter existence. And we moved out to Michigan, a little bitty town on the shoreline of the east part of Lake Michigan called Harbert. And it was in Harbert that I began working on a project that would literally come to take up much of the rest of my life. And that was the study and compiling a biography, an extended biography of the most fascinating man I'd ever had the privilege to study, Mr. Abraham Lincoln. When we moved into the house in Harbert, I took the attic and I made it into a writing room. And along the walls of that attic were nothing but bookshelves. And by the time we moved to South Carolina later on in life, I had over 15,000 books collected. Excuse me, North Carolina, I missed that. I had to hire a railroad car to take them I really did. And the only other thing in that room, the only other thing on the wall was a life mask of Mr. Lincoln. And I spent so much time in study of this man's life, read more than 1,000 books that preceded that, and articles and clippings and everything else I could find about this man. Now, you got to realize that I had known people who knew Mr. Lincoln. And the spark of the Lincoln-Douglas debate took place on the steps in 1858 of Knox College. Lincoln was all over our area, as you know, and his DNA, so to speak, went so deep into this ground that it'll never go away. And I'm fine with that. Yes. Absolutely fine with that. Well, at the time I was writing, it seemed that there was a controversy on whether Mr. Lincoln's face should be put on the cheapest piece of currency in our country, the penny. Many people thought it was disrespectful. And if I were to ask Mr. Lincoln at that time, I am sure he would have said it's fine with him, because he was of the people. And that's the way I tried to be myself, is of the people, because that's all we are. Everything I knew and learned was from people. Lincoln on pennies. This is from an essay I wrote. The face of Abraham Lincoln on the copper cent seems well and proper. If it were possible to talk with that great good man, he would probably say that he is perfectly willing that his face to be placed on the cheapest, most common coin in the country. The penny is strictly the coin of the common man. At Palm Beach, Newport, and Saratoga, you'll find nothing for sale for 1 cent. No ice cream cones at a penny here. No way. Keep the change, says the rich man. How many pennies do I get back, asks the poor man. Only the children of the poor know the joy of getting a penny for running around the corner to the grocery. The penny is the bargain counter coin. Only the common people walk out of their way to get something for 9 cents, reduced from 10 cents. The penny is the coin of those who are not sure of tomorrow, those who know if they are going to have $1 next week, they must watch their pennies this week. Follow the travels of a penny, and you will find that it stops at many cottages and few mansions. The common, homely face of Honest Abe will look good on the penny, the coin of the common folk from whom he came and to whom he belongs. True, true, true. Thank you. Oh, my. There was a song that Mr. Lincoln learned when he was a young boy, and it goes back to the War of 1812. And right after, when a song was written to try to bring new settlers into the southern part of the state, and much of Illinois was settled from that bottom up. And what they did was the speculators bought land grants from the soldiers who were awarded those land grants in the War of 1812. Many of them had no use for them. They had farms and factories and family on the East Coast, and they didn't want to move to this wild Indian territory that many people couldn't even pronounce. Well, we figure he came in a wagon, the buckboard, the wagon he was traveling in with his dad and his family and coming into Illinois, and this song is one of the reasons I do believe. It's called Illinois, spelled E-L-A-N-O-Y, to make sure those East Coasters would know how to say this wild Indian territory. With a semi-French name, way down upon the Wabash, this band was never known. If Adam had passed over it, the soil he'd surely owned. He'd think it was a garden he played in as a boy, and straight pronounced it Eden in the state of Illinois. So move your family westward to the health you will enjoy, and rise to wealth and honor in the state of Illinois. She's bounded by the Wabash, the Ohio, and the lakes. There's crawfish in the swampy land, the milkstick and the shakes. Well, these are slight diversions that take not from the joy of living in this garden land, state of Illinois. Some of your family westward, good health you will enjoy, and rise to wealth and honor in the state of Illinois. 'Twas here the Queen of Sheba came to Solomon of old, with a donkey load of spices, pomegranates, and fine gold. And when she saw this lovely land, her heart was filled with joy. Straight away she said, I'd like to be the Queen of Illinois. So move your family westward, bring all your girls and boys, and cross the Shawnee Ferry in the state of Illinois. Now I like this song so much I included it in my book, The American Song Bag. And I also wrote a final verse for it. Way up in the Northland, right on the borderline, a great commercial city, Chicago you'll find. Her men are all like Abelard, her women like Heloise. That's Abelard and Heloise, for those of you familiar with medieval romance faders. All honest, virtuous people, because they live in Illinois. Some of your family westward, good health you will enjoy, and rise to wealth and honor in the state of Illinois. Some move your family westward, bring all your girls and boys, and cross the Shawnee Ferry in the state of Illinois. Thank you, thank you. Well, that challenge was laying before me, and that challenge was to begin to write this biography. And I decided I would do the first part. It would cover the smooth-faced Lincoln. I'd call it the Prairie Years. And I began work on it up in that little attic in Harvard with all of those books and just that man's face to look at. And I began to think that I might be looking out through Lincoln's eyes. I learned so much about him. Well, the Prairie Years came out, and it was only part of the story. And I felt there was much, much more to the story to tell. It was 2 volumes. So in that house at Harvard, Michigan, with a night wind as my accompaniment, I began to put together the outline of what would be the biggest challenge of my life, is to complete this incredible man's biography. I was age 50 at the time. Well, the war years, Abraham Lincoln, the war years, consumed my efforts for 5 years. 5 years, I did nothing else but work on that. And occasionally write a poem about him. Lincoln, he was a mystery in smoke and flags, saying yes to the smoke, yes to the flags, yes to the paradoxes of democracy, yes to the hopes of government of the people, by the people, for the people. No to debauchery of the public mind. No to debauchery of the public mind. No to personal malice, nursed and fed. Yes to the Constitution when a help, no to the Constitution when a hindrance. Yes to man as a struggler amid illusions, each man fated to answer for himself, which of the faiths and illusions of mankind must I choose for my own sustaining light to bring me beyond the present wilderness? Lincoln, was he a poet? Did he write verse? Quote, I have not willingly planted a thorn in any man's bosom. I shall do nothing through malice. What I deal with is too vast for malice. End quote. Death was in the air, but so is birth. Now my poem, Grass, deals with the awful cost of all wars and the inevitability of not only war, but how the individual cost is forgotten by history and by nature. It's always forgotten. Grass. Pile the bodies high at Austerlitz and Waterloo. Shovel them under and let me work. I am the grass. I cover all. And pile them high at Gettysburg. And pile them high at Ypres and Verdun. Shovel them under and let me work. 2 years, 10 years. And the passengers ask the conductor, what place is this? Where are we now? I am the grass. Let me work. Well, following the publishing of The Warriors, everything changed. Awards came thick and fast. For the first set of books, I received an upfront payment of $30,000, and that helped a lot. So I knew the second book, and by the way, sold out 3 editions immediately. And when I went to write the next one, things were beginning to change. The total wordage, the total number of words in the second volume was 1,175,000. That's a hell of a lot of words. But I wasn't done. I wasn't done with Mr. Lincoln. This is called Cool Tombs. When Abraham Lincoln was shoveled down into the tombs, he forgot the copperheads and the assassin in the dust in the cool tombs. And Ulysses Grant lost all thought of con men in Wall Street. Cash and collateral turned ashes in the dust in the cool tombs. Pocahontas's body, lovely as a poplar, sweet as a red haw in May, red haw in November, or a pawpaw in May. Did she wonder? Does she remember? In the dust, in the cool tombs. Take any street full of people buying groceries and clothes, cheering a hero or throwing confetti or blowing tin horns, and tell me if the lovers are losers. Tell me if any get more than the lovers in the dust, in the cool tombs. Mr. Lincoln. Mr. Lincoln, an inspiration, total inspiration. Well, as I said, things were beginning to change, and people noticed. I won in 1940 a Pulitzer for the war years. I also won a Pulitzer Prize for history for the first set. And that was totally unexpected. The war was heated up. I did a film for Martin Marietta. You've heard of them? Before they were Martin Marietta, they were Martin, and they built bombers. And they hired me to do a film about the B-26 bomber. They also MGM hired me to do a movie and write a full-length movie and film, and that turned into the only novel I'd ever written, called Remembrance Rock. And if you go in Galesburg to the house where I was born and walk into the backyard, you'll find a big stone, and on that stone is a plaque, and on that plaque it says Remembrance Rock, and the rest of me is down under it. How could you not remember? The only novel I ever wrote. Let me get the banjo again. Things were changing. We were beginning to think about how the rest of our lives were going to go. The girls were grown. They were headed out on their own. I had made some money. I had made some fame. I had made some satisfaction in the work that I did, knowing that other people enjoyed it and paid attention to it. That's where the satisfaction comes from when you're an artist. Well, I didn't rest on my laurels. I wrote that book I just told you about, Remembrance Rock. And it was time to move on. We were going to move to a beautiful old Civil War house in North Carolina that was owned by the treasurer of the Confederacy. Isn't that delicious irony? The man who literally worshipped Lincoln and made his bones on Mr. Lincoln's life is living in the house of the treasurer of the Confederacy. His name was Christopher Memminger, and the house was called Connemara. A beautiful place on a hill. And Paula got to raise her Nubian goats for as many as she wanted to bring into this world. From this valley they say you were born. We will miss those bright eyes and sweet smile, for they say you have taken the sunshine that is brightened the pathway mile. Now if you know this chorus, please feel free to sing. Come and sit by my side if you love me. Very nice. Do not hasten to bid me adieu, but remember the Red River Valley and the one who has loved you so true. That sounds so pretty from up here. When you think of that valley you're leaving, oh how lonesome, how sad it will be when you think of that fond heart you're breaking and the grief you are causing me. One more time on the chorus. Come and sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten to bid me adieu, but remember the Red River Valley and the one who will love you so true. They They will bury me where you have wandered, 'neath the hills where the daffodils grow. When you're gone from that Red River Valley, I can't live here without you, I know. Last time, give it all you got from this valley. That's not. Wait a minute, is that right? Come and sit by my side if you love me. What I do without him? Come and sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten to bid me adieu, but remember the Red River Valley and the one who had loved you so true. Give yourselves a hand. Well, I'll tell you, things had gotten very good. I was loving the life I was living, and in this Remembrance Rock, there's a quote where I talk about my favorite things to keep in mind to live a successful life. 4 rules for living. Number 1, to be out of jail. 2, to eat and sleep regularly. 3, to get what you write printed in a free country for free people. And 4, to have a little love in the home and little affection and esteem outside the home. What do you think? And how about number 5? Could very well be, don't forget where you came from. Don't lose sight of what brought you along. I was growing older, and honors were getting to be routine. And when the whole state of North Carolina wanted to honor me just for moving there, I couldn't pass that up. So Edwin Gill, the treasurer of North Carolina, introduced me at that dinner like this. Our guest of honor, Carl Sandburg, is an original. Something that has never happened before. Something new under the sun. As how does this come about? Those schooled in science might call it a mutation. Those steeped in religion will call it a miracle. Surely free-swinging Walt Whitman surely free-swinging Walt Whitman was his great uncle, and shy, sensitive Emily Dickinson was his great aunt. Among his distant relatives, I find Bret Hart and Mark Twain, while his first cousins could be Vachel Lindsay, Edgar Lee Masters, and Robert Frost. And I think among his neighbors, we might even find our own Thomas Wolfe. But when I come to name his literary father, I hesitate and then go on to say that he could have been that tall, angular man with a stovepipe hat who went to Gettysburg and one day made a brief, immortal address. And if I were so bold as to attempt to name his spiritual ancestor, I would suggest that patriarch whose gifted hand wrote the book of Job. I just got chills again, and that's hard for a dead man. Well, there has to come an end to every life, to every day, to every evening, to every banjo, hopefully not, as I lean it against the wall. Well, oh, you're good, Fox, don't worry about it. Let me begin, or I was going to say begin the way I ended. That ain't right. End the way I began, with poetry and song. And this is another quote from my novel, the only one I ever wrote, called Remembrance Rock. To every man, be who he may, there comes a last happiness and a last day, when the trees are leafed out and the earth is giving with early summer laughter. I hope to be seeing you, and we can talk of rich days that have been, and of a lad who's a shining memory. Steel rails waiting from the margins of my sight, rumbling out there right beyond my window. Spirit we northward through the middle of the night, Union Station bound, Chicago. City's got an energy, the pull of shifting gears, reaching down the tracks to touch my longing. Loosen the ties that bind a rambler's leaving here. Steel rail ribbon carry me away. Past the fields of home I know, past the forest and the river, magnetized by ebb and flow, stated simply need to go. Thank you very much for being here today. I much appreciate this and the opportunity to come back to Bishop Hill. And with that, I will disappear into the mists of time. Or something like that.